All right, Steve, we're out there, so we're ready to go when you guys are.
Okay. What was it, Jace?
Indian flat track racer.
That's pretty cool looking.
Thanks.
Okay, Jeff, I'm ready. We'll go ahead and kick the meeting off. Let me know.
Yep, you're good, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is a meeting of the Administrative Committee of the City of Havre de Grace. And the reason for the meeting today is to review two pieces of legislation, specifically two ordinances. I have Shane Grimm on as the Department of Planning Director. He's going to review the first order of business, which is a zoning change ordinance amendment. On the line, we have participating is the mayor, the council president, Councilman Robertson, Councilman Martin, and the city attorney, along with Shane Grimm and myself. Patrick Seipold may be joining us in a few moments. He's on another call right now. So Shane, if you would, please take us through sort of the background and then the amendments themselves.
Sure. So first, the City of Havre de Grace does not have anything related to assisted living facilities, which is typical in most jurisdictions. We're all familiar with assisted living facilities. So I did receive a call from a lady who was interested in doing an assisted living facility, but on a very small capacity. When I was with the county, we kind of designated those smaller facilities as what we would call a personal care boarding home. So the smaller ones were the personal care boarding homes. The larger ones were assisted living facilities. Essentially, they were the same thing. But for the smaller numbers, we called them a personal care boarding home. So this lady inquired as to how she could do it. She had a property in the City of Havre de Grace that she was interested in doing this type of use. So I spoke with her, and she really wants to have a limited use as far as the number of individuals. For her operation, she only wanted to have 4 individuals in the personal care boarding home. So I crafted an ordinance that says 5, and then talks about specifics about it has to be within a single family dwelling. It's only permitted in the R1 and R2 districts. On the rare instance, if it would ever even happen, if someone wanted to construct a new single family dwelling, they would have to construct, it would have to be similar in appearance to others in the neighborhood, those types of things. I did review it with the Planning Commission when we met, I guess it was last week, and they did recommend 2 changes to that. And one of the changes was that there should be a minimum size for the dwelling, which I really had no objection to. And also, Volney Ford also recommended that we specifically change the definition of personal care boarding home to add a component that talks about basically 24-hour care, around-the-clock care. So I have no objections, and quite frankly, I think they're good recommendations to changes. So I'm prepared to make those changes. But this is a use that is typical in most jurisdictions. I'm very familiar with it in the county. One of the things that I will share with you that was always kind of a problem in the county was that some of these uses would come into a neighborhood, and they would want to do more individuals in the boarding home than what we're proposing. And what would happen is they would have more need for the personal care, so they would have more need for nursing care and things like that. So for their offsite parking requirement, they would need to essentially create a parking lot in the front of their house. And so they were creating kind of like a commercial parking lot situation in a residential neighborhood, which we would never support. That'll never happen in this situation because we're limiting it to only 5 boarders in a personal care boarding home. So I think it's a good thing. It's a very much a needed use, and we can regulate it. It is put in as a conditional use, so we require that extra level of review through the Board of Appeals as well.
What happens, Shane, what happens to those cases where they want to do more than 5?
They couldn't. So the answer to your question is essentially they could ask for a variance. They could ask for a variance to do more than 5, but I really don't see a situation in where we would say that we would support that variance because, as I've said, variances always come back to, you always have to relate a variance to what is the uniqueness of the property and the situation. So you really can't relate a variance for more people in a personal care boarding home to the uniqueness of a property.
But
So
don't we have places that have more than 5 in Havre de Grace?
you're thinking about a different situation where we have those rooming houses. Rooming houses are a completely different thing that has been in the code for quite some time, which I personally am not a big fan of. But rooming houses, they don't have a specific number limitation on them. And rooming houses are more geared to really anybody. You could do a rooming house, and they're not geared towards either people needing personal care, elderly, or people with mental retardation or things like that. That's what a personal care boarding home is more geared towards.
What's the place on Union Avenue? I mean, what's that classified as
Which one?
in the 800 block?
Steve might have to help me there.
I can't hear. Steve's muted.
Is that the Always in Grace?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's in great.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'll just try to give you a brief background on Always in Grace. So Always in Grace got approved by the Board of Appeals, although I don't
Okay.
agree that it should have been a Board of Appeals approval. So when Always in Grace came before the board, the justification from the Department of Planning at the time was that, we're going to change the zoning code to put an assisted living facility category in the code. Obviously, that zoning code change never happened. But what the board decided was that a assisted living facility would fall under what's called a healthcare facility. There's a definition of healthcare facility currently in the zoning code, and the board decided that use would fall under a healthcare facility.
Okay.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's what the board decided at that time. And so I think by codifying it more specifically to a personal care boarding home and making specific standards on what it needs to be is more appropriate.
Yeah, and I was just asking because I know that we looked at one time of putting my mother-in-law there, and but the time that we needed to put her in, it wasn't finalized yet. It hadn't been approved, and so we had to go elsewhere. But
Jane, I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Restrooms, are they going to have individual restrooms for each room, or is it going to be standard, hey, we have one restroom in the house?
No, in zoning, my philosophy is we don't really get into specifics of things that are very much more highly regulated above and beyond zoning. So a personal care boarding home is very strictly regulated by the state of Maryland, and anybody that operates a boarding home for personal care has to take tests and things like that to be able to be approved to be able to do that. So I don't think that's the place of zoning to get involved in the specifics of how many bathrooms and things like that.
Shane,
Shane, I just
Right.
wanted to, I'm sorry.
go ahead, April.
I just wanted to confirm that the other one I'm familiar with is the one on, I don't even know what street it's on. The one that's operated by Ken Byer, that is the addiction services. It has a residential component. Did that fall under a healthcare facility also? I can't remember.
I believe that was also how we decided at that time that it fell under the healthcare facility designation. Healthcare facility definition is fairly broad. But
Okay.
and the reason why, just to as a point of clarification, so a healthcare facility is only permitted, I believe, in the RO district.
I think that's right.
It might be an RB as well. But so for the individual that would like to do what we're calling a personal care boarding home, a healthcare facility is not permitted in the R2 district. I don't personally recommend that we extend healthcare facility to other zoning districts. I feel like we should tailor a specific use and need and have specific standards and requirements that would then be applied to that zoning district. And I'm recommending that the ordinance be for R1 and R2.
Shane, in the case of looking at Always in Grace, and I think they're licensed for 10, I think, 8 or 10. But wouldn't you say if there was a like situation that came up and they asked for a variance that based on, and they were doing the same thing because this was a former doctor's office, as OBGYN doctor, that was virtually the footprint never changed of the facility. It was originally a single family home, much later years converted to a doctor's office, a doctor's practice. And then the model that Always in Grace really used the same footprint.
Mhm.
So, and let me give you an example. The place that's next door, I think, not where Chad Tate is, but next door, there's a single family house there. If they propose to come in with a similar type arrangement for the for a healthcare facility like Always in Grace, but they wanted 8 or 10, you said they would be entitled to at least try to get a variance. Is that right?
So you're speaking specifically about a use on Union or an existing property on Union Avenue?
Yeah, yeah.
So they would technically, if you're thinking about, if we're talking about precedents based on previous approvals,
Right.
they would fall under the healthcare facility designation, and there really isn't
Okay.
a specific limit on the number of borders or that they could have.
Okay, you're right.
Mhm.
All right.
So in the alternative, we've had many conversations about this. In theory, the lady who would like to do why we're talking about this, in theory, she could ask for a use variance to have a healthcare facility in the R2 district. But I never recommend that because, as I always say, a use variance is a very, very tough burden of proof to approve. You have to prove that there is no other use of the property other than that use. And therefore you should be granted the variance. And that's just very tough to prove, and they're very rarely granted. So that's why I think it's more appropriate to add a specific category called personal care boarding home to allow that use.
Okay.
I have a question, following up a little bit on what Steve said. So if he mentioned that Always in Grace was converted from a doctor's office, and I look at the single family homes on Union Avenue, and we've got the deconversion incentive where we're trying to get them back to single family houses. Is there a way going forward that we can restrict any newer facilities to be not on Union Avenue or the old section where we want to try and get the single family homes back? Or do we want to limit it to just doctor's offices? This is going a little bit beyond the current legislation, but I'm just wondering if we want to incorporate something where we can better facilitate where, if these types of things are going in, we can have a little more consistency. I just feel like we're all over the map, and I just would like to see more consistency in the application of it. So I don't know if we should incorporate it in this particular legislation or whether or not it should be separate.
I think in a roundabout way, we are kind of doing it with this ordinance because we're making a specific use called a personal care boarding home. So I would say, for example, if someone wanted to come in on Union Avenue and say, I want to convert this existing dwelling to do a personal care boarding home, my response, assuming that the ordinance would get passed, would be, you don't meet the requirements because a personal care boarding home is not permitted in the RO district.
Mhm.
So then they could appeal to the Board of Appeals for that use.
Again, that would be a use variance though, and something that I would, typically would not support.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
This is strictly R1 and R2.
That's correct. I really didn't want to, I didn't want to get it, for the most part, the R zoning district is Bully Rock. And I just didn't really want to go down that road with, open it up to also Bully Rock. But if that's something that, we also want to put it in the R district, that, we can discuss that.
Yeah, my question had been kind of similar to April's. But I guess piggybacking off of that, if we do, if someone comes in, they find a property and they want to do any kind of conversion to it, they would have to go through a separate permitting process, which means that they'd have to upgrade the facilities, right? Like add fire suppression systems, stuff like that. But
Right.
without, because in my mind, this is kind of like a border situation. So it's everyone shares the communal facilities like kitchen, bathroom, stuff like that. You really don't need to cordon off much of the building. In theory, a person could just buy an existing home or an existing doctor's office and use it in this manner. Is that possible? And with that, does that also mean now, you could have a situation where 5 or more adults are living in an assisted care facility without any fire sprinklers, anything like that?
So based on this ordinance, there wouldn't be more than 5. And so the first part of it is you would have a higher level of review because it would be a conditional use. So meaning not only do you have to go through planning commission, get a recommendation to the Board of Appeals, but ultimately the Board of Appeals would have to approve it. But specifically to your point, Jason, is that any change of use of any building. So for example, if you had a single family residence right now and you came and said, I want to do this personal care boarding home. One of the things that I'm going to tell you is that with your personal care boarding home, you're changing the use of your dwelling. Don't think about it as one of the things that can oftentimes get confusing is there's a change of use with respect to zoning. And then there's also change of use with respect to structure, which is more building code related. So any change of use to that structure would require a code analysis and building code review. So for example, in a congregant facility, they would likely have to provide some type of fire suppression, also ADA's accessibility and things like that. I'll be honest with you, I don't know all the particulars about what they would be required, but whenever you change the use of a structure, then you come into building code requirements.
Yeah, speaking of what I know with Always in Grace, and Dave can probably speak to it from where his mother-in-law is, they did have to put in extra wide like hallways. Everything had to be accessible. If this is a personal care use facility, then when you say a shared kitchen, well, they prepare meals for the entire population there. And typically they all eat in the same dining area together. So it's not like 5 or 6 people taking turns using the kitchen. It's prepared meals for a larger group. Now, within this designation, Shane, there would be specific requirements both from, I'm not sure if Joint Commission falls into this or not, but there'd be some oversight, as you said, either from the health department or somebody else that would require certain other requirements, not only for patient safety or for fire safety, but more importantly for patient safety. Correct.
The state highly regulates personal care boarding homes and assisted living facilities. And I actually learned a little bit more myself recently in speaking with the individual that is interested in doing a personal care boarding home in Havre de Grace, in that they had to take a fairly rigorous course, and I think even like an exam to be able to be licensed to be able to do that, to provide that type of care in that type of facility.
Now, Shane, this particular house in question, is it a single story house or is it multi-level?
I believe it's to my knowledge, it's a single level house.
Okay, because my question is, if it's a multi-level, would they have to put chairlifts in?
Well, I would think CP, if it was a multi-level, then the upper level may be used for other purposes and not patient care.
Yeah.
So
And the reason why I asked is where my mother-in-law is, they have the patients on the second floor. And so they put chairlifts in to get them up and down.
yeah, I know where my dad is, the second floor is used for a completely different use.
Right, I understand
They
that.
have no patients up there. Yeah, they'd have to have ease of access to get
Right.
the elderly up and down, or whoever they're carrying.
Jane, wouldn't that be something in the building code that would address that as far as ADA accessibility and compliance when you're servicing people that have mobility issues that?
Yeah, so when the change of use of the building occurs, so when, assuming that someone will get through the process and it could get approved by the Board of Appeals, then they would submit plans that we would submit to the county, and they would look at it. And I'm confident that it would be a change of use from a single family dwelling. So then that would kick in the requirements for a congregate type use, and would require specific things like chairlifts and things like that. In my experience, for personal care boarding homes, most of the individuals that are in personal care boarding homes are not mobile enough to be navigating stairways. Certainly, CP said, has seen a second story dwelling where they've used the second story, but in my experience, they're typically older individuals that don't have the mobility and really do require the personal care throughout the day.
Yeah. And I was just asking because I go back to what Steve said, safety's got to be paramount. So for the patients or the individuals that'll be there taking advantage of the boarding home.
Right.
Yeah. So when I was mentioning the shared kitchen and all, I just meant like you wouldn't have to do a lot of structural changes to an existing home. And in my mind, that means that there's not really an opportunity for a regulatory agency to make sure that the safety measures are in place. However, you said that the change in use of the facility or the change in use of the home would be the time when a regulatory agency, in this case being the county and or the state, would come in and take a look and make sure that everything is feasible. My only other question would be why, I know that you touched a little bit on it with the R1, but why limit it to just RB and R? Why not for commercial too? Or is that just a moot point?
So the ordinance specifically says that the use would be permitted as a conditional use in the R1 and R2. I don't personally think that it's something that would be considered in the commercial district, but I just looked at it as really limited it to R1 and R2. Certainly, if we wanted to add RB, if you wanted to add RB, I have no objection to that.
I was just curious because I know that some, there's like one right off of Revolution, and that's kind of set up. They were housing people there for a while, and I don't remember what the situation was, but I mean that I believe was zoned commercial or zoned RB, one of the two. And in my mind, I thought that could be used for kind of what you're saying. So I guess I just want to understand a little bit more about why just limit it to R1 and R2.
Jason, the specific facility that you're talking about, I think, is the facility for veterans that is next to where Habitat for Humanity did their project. And that was approved, I believe, also as a rooming house, essentially. But just to give you a little bit of background too on how I handle these types of things, is that when we have a project that comes in and it requires approval through the Planning Commission and or Board of Appeals, I have a pre-application meeting. And one of the main things that I do during the pre-application meeting is kind of get everything out on the table so that people can make a decision. And one of the things that I talk to them about, although personally I'm not an expert in the building code, I know just enough to be dangerous, and that's why I always defer to Mr. Seifold since he is an expert.
Sure. Yeah.
That I always tell individuals that when you're making a change, that those are the types of things that you need to consider, and you need to consider before you move forward. You need to maybe talk to an architect and talk about your plans, so that you're not spending a whole lot of money on the front end to get approval, only to find out on the back end that you're going to have to spend all this money to make a facility ADA compliant. So that's one of the things we do to ensure that individuals know what they're getting into.
Shane, you said something earlier that if somebody came to you and said they wanted to do something like on Union Avenue, this personal care boarding home, and you would say, well, you know, it's an RO and it doesn't fall in the category of R1, R2. Are we setting ourselves up in the fact that somebody could come back and say, well, I see something similar on Union Avenue. It's a little bit bigger than 5. I want to do something similar on a smaller scale. Why do you allow one and not the other?
That's a good question, CP. I think we could look at it in the absence of major wholesale changes to the code. I think we could look at it as a healthcare facility as more than 5 individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And a minor facility is 5 or less. So I think that's an easy question to tackle if the question would ever come up. So I don't have any problem with that issue.
So Shane, are you going to, are we going to roll with this the way it's written, or did you want to make those 2 changes that you suggested early on?
I think that I'd like to make those changes based on what the Planning Commission had recommended that we should do with the definition and the size of the dwelling. So, so I have no problem with making those changes.
From the administrative group's perspective, is there, do we want to move this forward to make those changes and then have Shane run that by the Planning Committee? Are we in favor of that?
I think so.
Yeah,
I would say that.
I see thumbs up from Councilman Martin,
that's the right course of action.
Councilman Robertson, April,
I'm in favor of it, even though my camera's not working.
and the mayor.
Yep.
Okay, good. Then that's what we'll do. Shane will take that action and move that forward.
Okay.
Can I just add, I had some stylistic and some legal slight changes, nothing substantive, just how it was structured. I'll talk to Shane about that.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think just if I may briefly, April and I have had conversations on and off over probably 2 years about changes that we generally need to make regarding similar type uses. And discussion I had with April yesterday is I'm going to be doing some more research into similar type uses, because I think our code really needs to be changed to make sure that we're complying with federal standards on how you treat protected classes and different types of housing arrangements. So I think that's something that's it's not just us. I think many jurisdictions are dealing with different types of unique housing circumstances that we need to update in our code.
There's the mayor.
I didn't know that my camera had like a little thing on it that blocked it. This is highfalutin computers, better than one I have at home. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay, so the next piece of business, as council recalls, back in, I believe it was 2018, council made the, provided a resolution and an MOU to the HOA up at the Woods of Bayview. And there was a number of conditions that the HOA had to follow through with. And primarily the takeover, the city has taken over the responsibility of the roads at Spinnaker Way, Hall Court, Harbor Court, Hall Court, and Hemler. So over the last 12 to 18 months, the HOA has worked diligently with Tim Whitty and his group, and they hired an engineering firm to do a required inspection of the road, including borings, so that we knew that the road system that we were going to have the city absorb was properly designed and maintained. So all those changes that were necessary based on the engineering work that was done have been accomplished. The HOA has made the proper notifications to the county. As far as legal sufficiency goes, April has reviewed it. And typically what we would have done was propose a resolution to the council to finalize that all portions of their agreement have been made, including, as you recall, the HOA had to raise the HOA fees up at the Woods of Bayview in order to get this paid for. So everything has been addressed. The April, just prior to this meeting, although we had a verbal affirmation from the HOA that they did raise the fees, Charlie Heiner from the management company sent in both the board minutes and also an affidavit stating that when the HOA fees were raised and what they currently are today. So they have met every obligation of the MOU. And again, having a discussion with the city attorney, she felt like this should probably be instead of a resolution, an ordinance. So therefore, that's what you have before you is an ordinance just stating all of the requirements have been met by both parties. And the city is ready to, by law, take that into the city road system.
Steve, if I may, to the best of my knowledge, all of the plat requirements, re-recording of plats and dedications have occurred, and those plats have been recorded.
And all those are in the packet of information that the council has that we placed in the read file.
Yes.
Steve, one quick question. I know we initially got a lot of pushback when they were really not in favor of raising the HOA fees, but we kind of held them to that standard with the thought that, you know, once you get this in place and the city does take it over, in all likelihood, the fees could come back down.
Yeah,
Has there been any discussion with that on whether they plan on doing that?
I have not had any of that discussion, nor do I think it's really this up to the city to even weigh in on that.
Right.
Whether they
I was just-
drop it down or keep it.
Right.
I don't think that the city needs to discuss any further about the HOA fees once the part that concerned us is over with. That's the HOA's business.
And I totally agree, Jason. And the thing is, it was just interesting because that was a big pushback moment. And, you know, I was just wondering what their future plans were, not that we weigh in or not that we even vote on that.
Not a part of any discussion I've had with them. All I know is they, because I think I was somewhat involved in this with the council early on. We set the MOU standards and they have certainly complied
Absolutely.
and done everything we've asked them to do.
Absolutely.
So this is in both the hard copy read file and in the virtual read file for council to review. It's on the agenda for Monday night. April, do you have anything to add?
I had one or two minor edits to the ordinance. I'll get with Tammy on that. And the only other question I have, do you want me to notify the Tina from Bradford's office, Attorney Bradford's office, and also Charlie Heiner? I can let them know what's going to be on the agenda if they wanted to show up and comment on it.
I did speak with Charlie Heiner,
Okay.
and Charlie is going to attend. The meeting. I didn't speak with anybody from Bradford.
Okay, I'll just send her an email confirming that it's on the agenda for Tuesday night, and, you know, they can do with that information what they want.
Mayor, do you have anything?
Bill, your mic is off.
I have nothing to add.
I think.
I'm good.
Anybody else? Okay, so we'll move this forward and include it with the in the agenda packet. So that's it, folks. That's all the
Good.
2 pieces of information that we needed to address through the administrative committee.
Thanks. Well done.
All right.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks, April.
Have a good one.
Thank you, Jeff Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
See you guys.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.